thank you. Both very interesting presentations. For Ulla, could you elaborate a little bit what took place during that silence? Like you mentioned that the internment itself wasn't very traumatic, or at the time especially was considered like non-special, but things were worse after that. Can you elaborate a little bit why and how?
Basically, well, my interviewees tell that the things were worse after that because it relates to the fact that they lost all of their property mainly. So they lost their homes and they have to, in a way, start all over. And they also, of course, it's not everyone has the similar kind of experience. So these kinds of experiences are very, very heterogeneous, so not everyone feels the same. But basically the hardships, they explain it that the hardships started after that because they had to start all over. It was a lot of these very concrete difficulties related to how to start all over your life, and related to the fact that they often describe that the wartime was in a way this kind of real change of eras. Before wars, they and their families had really different kind of societal position as Germans, because before the war nobody considered Germanness as something bad, but after the war it was clearly this. They felt that it's not neutral to be German person. So I think it in a way it relates to their sayings that it was more difficult afterwards. It relates to these kind of things.
Can I ask another one? Then about the compensation that of course comes 60 years, 70 years late. How was that received? Like 3,000 euros for losing all your properties? Doesn't really sound much, was it?
Yeah, it was received quite negatively. I have also analyzed that, and it in many ways they feel that it was not enough and it came too late, and it was a wrong kind of method to give money for compensation. But this is very we have a lot of different case studies related to compensations of the related to Second World War, and they are very often found. They are not received very positively among the victims or the persons who get the compensation. And also there is also always in this compensation it's connected this kind of feeling that what the state actually wants to do when they give this compensation. So often these persons who receive the compensation, they feel just that the state just wants to, get rid of these kinds of, and let's not talk about this anymore. So from the perspective of these persons who got the compensation, it's not very big success.
I would like to ask about the silence. Because what you said about the tellability of the, in terms of the collective memory, that makes completely sense. But then I wonder if the people you have been interviewed, if they had some kind of a community where they would have their own private memory that would actually contradict the silence, so that there actually was discussion, but no one was listening, or there was like no tellability between the collective national level and then the community level?
That's a very good question, and I have been thinking that a lot. And of course, oral history materials are the kind of materials that I cannot really. People they don't tell very these kinds of materials. It's very hard to always interpret what actually happened in the past based on these narratives. So it's very difficult actually to know what happened and was there some kind of discussion. But I can tell that there was no sort of this community of these internees. They were not meeting each others, and they did not have very many contacts with other internees. So they were, in a way, they did not have any kind of these big communities. But of course, in family circles, they discussed. But then again, quite many of my interviewees, they say to me that it was something really weird, and they, in a way, they described also the silence in a family atmosphere and in family context, that then maybe somebody sometimes said that, oh, it was a weird thing and that kind of things, but clearly the fact that there wasn't this kind of public frame or this kind of more general interpretation of this event, it in a way prevented this certain kind of interpretation what actually happened. I think the private experiences and narratives, they seem to relate more to these kinds of minor details, or these kind of what happened to some young person who for example sneak under the fence, and these kinds of small everyday events, but this kind of general interpretation of the whole event, I think that came after this documentary film. But you are absolutely right, it's almost impossible to actually find out how this was discussed, for example, in homes during the 60s, for example. So, yeah.
Did any of them say that it would have been better that the documentary would not have been done? You know, I'm just sort of thinking that partly, of course, the silence was that it was easier for them, as you described, that because in general, overall, I mean, globally, it was not, I mean, German had a sort of, had some pressures. Yeah. So it was also partly maybe at those times easier for them. Things were silent. Then one may ask, is it now they're good or bad? I don't know. I'm not saying that one shouldn't, because this was a surprise for me. So one shouldn't reveal these kind of things. But I mean, if we go for the sort of individual level.
I very much agree with you in a sense that it's often very automatic for us to say that it's very good to talk, and it's very good to have these things out in the open, and it's very very post Second World War understanding, and it's not not everyone agrees this. And well, none of my interviewees said to me that it was bad that the documentary came out, but some of them describe it, all these efforts to get compensation, as worthless, or just like, why we do this now, that we don't have anything, and we don't need anything, and this is in a way worthless. So I think it's very important for me as a researcher to avoid the kind of imposing the idea on this topic that it's good to speak, and it's very good to remember, and it's because it's not like that. We should not have this kind of understanding of this universal goodness of remembering and telling and not silencing.
In particular, the stories have been a bit different in the family.
Yes.
Related to the interviews, like you said that you had your interviews after the documentary. So do you think that the answers or the interviews would have been different if you have been interviewing before the documentary?
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the I think the major points of my research, that the public interpretation of these events, they so much affect the personal memory, and also that certain kind of testimonies that are, for example, certain persons are more likely to give testimonies, for example, for the press. So they are also in a way they start to circulate among these persons, and they are. And I think it's the same thing with all memories, that how we remember our past. It's very much related to how the more general discussions about these events are going on, and how the past is interpreted in them. Yeah.
And so how do you think that, or like in what way they would have been different, those earlier interviews, if you would have met them earlier?
I think, the most important thing is, of course, that this kind of certain point in narrative, which very much relates to this documentary, that then we found out that it was the Finnish officials who actually did it. So it's in many of these interviewees and these personal narratives. It seems to be quite an important part of this narrative. So of course, for me it's very difficult to speculate at how they would be, but that's for sure that this kind of motive would be lacking.
Yeah, and of course it sounds that there is like a more of a story when there is this like big twist. If there is, the earlier version was that, well, not so like extremely bad things happened, if that was the case.
Yeah, because of course it's a very cultural way to it's very typical kind of story that there are these people who have been mistreated, and then there is these wrongdoers, and so this kind of event got the proper kind of frame and the proper kinds of elements.
Do you think with modern times, with so much coverage of everything, that it's even possible to have this prolonged silence again on such topics, or do you think that it's impossible with the internet and with so much communication now that it couldn't be repeated?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I think that it's always. I think that I understand the nature of memory in a way. It's always selective in a way, that not everything is remembered, or not everything is dealt in a society. That it always needs to some kind of choosing process has to involve when we pick up these events that are more memorable or important for the societies. But I think, it can be that for example, because of the internet, there are more forums or these channels for different kinds of communities to make their own kinds of interpretations of the past in a way. But
maybe you can ask, even though everything is public, you can ask that if university professors in Turkey get sort of thrown out, do they need a compensation after 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? When is it due for a compensation? When is it not explainable anymore that this happened?
Concerning this experience that there was life before the war and then after the war. And in my studies, I've met this family in Borås in west of Sweden, and the couple were both from Woods. They were, and both survived. They were from Jewish community of Woods in Poland, and they were survivors of the Holocaust and met in Borås after the war. And then they started up their own company. And almost all of their employees were from Finland. Yeah. And something that came up when I met this couple, they are very old now, was that in the post-war Sweden, in that context, it was really easy to socialize with the Finnish workers because they shared this somehow without knowing what had happened in Finland or what had happened in the ghettos and in the concentration camps. They had this shared experience that there once was the life before the war. And then there is this new life after the war. Yeah. So that could be, but this also shows that there are these different layers of memories that can be very complex.
I totally agree. And I think that the kind of making these distinctions between eras. It's very common pattern, for example, in different myths and mythologies to how to in a way construct time and to construct differences between eras of time and also attach certain kinds of meanings to this. My PhD dissertation was about the life writings of former Karelian child evacuees, about their related to their evacuation journey from Karelia to Finland, and it's very clear in that in their narrative it's very sharp, the distinction between the life before it was located in Karelia and then was the evacuation journey, which was the clear distinction, and then it's life after, which is and of course certain kinds of values and meanings are attached to these two periods of time, and I think it's quite yeah.
The people you interviewed, before the public acknowledgement or the frame which allowed them to speak about the stuff, did they before that want to speak about it, or did they think about it in their own minds, in their own minds, or were they kind of silent on individual level too?
Well, that's something that it's very difficult to actually know. Of course, I asked them that, did you talk about this before? And very many told me that yes, sometimes there was something inside family, or they told that sometimes they told maybe a good friend or something like that, but not like in very large level.
Oh yeah, but my point was, did they think about it? Did they think about it? Not necessarily speak with anyone, but just did they think about these stuffs?
Yeah, that's very, very difficult to know. To be honest, it's very difficult to know. I think for some it was something that it affected more of their lives. Maybe if there was something bad happening to their family that was closely related to, for example, this internment. Maybe then they more maybe reflected this topic, but not all clearly. Some of them were quite. They said that they haven't really thought about this before this documentary came and this compensation law, and now it in a way started again this whole process of thinking about this. So, well, it's difficult to say for sure how big role this event actually had on their lives before this, but for some maybe more, but for some it wasn't that important at all, I think. But for me that's something that it's really difficult to find out.
Is there any possibility that selection bias affects the results? Or?
Well, it's rather a small group of people. It was back then it was 470 persons who were interned. So when I started my research in 2014, there weren't so many of them alive. So it was approximately a little bit more than 40 people who were alive. So I interviewed 26. I interviewed all of them who I was able to get in touch with and who wanted to tell their story. So I think it's relatively good in a way catch. And there are these inside this group there are these activists who actively wanted this compensation law to come, and they actively lobbied this law, and they have been in active giving these interviews to media. But there were quite many also. There were a big group of those who haven't been active or who haven't given any interviews or things like that, and who have not been involved in this compensation law project. So I think it's a small group of people, and it's of course this kind of research. It's not about the quantity. It's more like this kind of laboratory of seeing this through this small case study, that how memory can work in society and between individuals and cultures and between the private sphere and public sphere.
Okay, thank you.